For me, it really started, I think, my love of architecture, or the built environment, trying to help people understand the value of inanimate objects that we devalue. And so that's been a natural segue then to think about all of the people that I assume everybody cherishes or values.
Yeah.
And then as you move through the world, you realize that these hierarchies get set where it's like, well, no, that person is important because of this pedigree or because of this accolade or this thing. As I began to experience that kind of attention, I was always baffled. It's like, well, what about that kind of person? Because that's really the person that was the bellwether in the community, the barber, the candy lady, these everyday figures. So I think the more I got into kind of formal conversations about community, the more I realized how much of an expert I was, kind of both of these worlds. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we've both been able to elevate that without it looking like glad handing or
just being too heavy-handed.
Yeah.
To kind of add to that, I was driving through my old neighborhood when I was in Baltimore a couple of weeks ago, and the thing that I recall the most was the corner stores and who owned them and the video games that were there, but also there were all these kind of markers in the community that kind of stood out to me more so than a lot of other things that most people would consider when you think about your upbringing that you will remember. But I think that the community places that I recall became like the staple for my development about community, about value systems, but also remembering the visual aspect of them.
Right.
The color of the space. That played a really big part in the way that we gather in the spaces, the exterior as well as the interior space. And going back to those spaces and looking at the imprint of Candy Lady, for instance, and growing up in a space when people, growing up in Baltimore and cities like Baltimore, people always think that, compared to contemporary narrative, thinking about different cities and what's happened since the crack epidemic, like the book that Jamel Shabazz said, Time Before Crack. I always think about that when people talk about, like, I'm from Baltimore. I remember Baltimore in a totally different way than The Wire. I think about the Candy Lady when I think about Baltimore. I don't think about the crack man in Baltimore, because for me, the Candy Lady was more of a staple figure in the community, and she had way more value than whoever else was doing things that were not necessarily to work to build the community.
Right.
So I remember those things as being so important, and just the idea of community and even the palette of community. Because I think about the palette.
Yes.
The palette to me is the most inspirational thing of my work. Is I think about color, and I always talk to students about the idea of color is important for you to understand sometimes why you pick that color.
Yes.
Because we have choices, and that's a choice to pick a color to work with. And those colors usually are somehow rooted in some level of adolescence, memory, or family memory, or even a blanket that you may have had as a child on the couch.
And I think it's important to honor and to pull those in immediately. So I know a lot of young people, a lot of students, especially in a kind of Western educational landscape, constantly are told that, no, you understand that color because of this. That form is because of this.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. And then you're kind of secretly thinking, well, not really, but okay. And so not to wait 20 years to then be able to pull those out or to honor them, but to start with that. And what does that lead to when pink is for oil moisturizer and not for
exactly.
Baragon in Mexico or whatever. It's like
pink lotion. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, right.
You don't remember that.
and if you say it, 20 people answer oil moisturizer, right? So so that also situates people in a certain time, and it helps, to your point, to get people to understand that, we're young.
Yeah.
And we have a whole, formative memory that has nothing to do with the narratives that we hear today. And so literally when I drive down lots of these streets, although they're vacant, my memory is like, that's where so-and-so was.
Yeah.
It's not in a nostalgic way, like apologetic.
Yeah.
It's like, we already did this.
Yes.
So we can do it again.
Yes.
And how is the work we're doing an entree into that?
Yeah.
Because the joy of people just hearing about what the show was going to be about, they haven't even seen the work.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, a lot of these people don't understand abstraction at all.
Yeah.
But are fully invested.
Yeah.
Like, how's a Candy Lady? you got green apple in there, don't you? You know, like it's kind of like return an investment. You know, but maybe they don't live in the neighborhood anymore, or their kids have never heard of the Candy Lady, or you know, these are other Black people. This is not even a larger audience of folks that didn't realize that these community figures existed.
I think we're in a place where everything has become more mobile and things are more nomadic, and the idea of stakes in certain communities that are considered kind of landmarks for people to kind of navigate through and meet at.
Right.
You know, because you would say, meet me here or meet me there.
Right.
Those things are such an important part of just framing, you know, the creative process for me. Because when I think about subject matter or think about inspiration, I always go back to reflections of childhood. And again, not even in a really nostalgic way. Again, it more becomes like ingredients for something.
Right.
Like I look at it really from a very aesthetic place, not thinking about the sentimentality of it, but the purpose of it and how that becomes part of my practice. You know, so when people think about like looking at the past or looking at certain moments of the past that are not tragic or traumatic, you think of this idea of nostalgia. But honestly, that never really kind of appeals to me as a way of operating.
Right.
For me, it's really about removing the nostalgia from it and think about it strictly as a form of influence and materiality, and how to kind of translate that into something that's physical, relating to work, relating to objects. And what I think is really interesting to me is that I love to see people from the hood or people I know, Black people from various places, see elements that I've kind of been inspired by, have used as a subject, kind of putting them in a different context to kind of show them how important I think it is.
Yes.
You know?
And they listen, right?
Yeah.
When we say it, then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that was,
wow.
Yeah. But I also think, especially with the floaties, like for me, it also allowed people to understand that they have the right to it again.
Yes.
So when they see it, they remember it, but then have somehow decided it's not part of what they should be valuing. Yeah. So there's initial sort of like, can we just sit in the pool? Can we just eat candy on the sidewalk?
Exactly.
Like,
you actually can. And we actually have been doing it, you know, with some of the value systems that are really embedded in your practice, and the project or the work you did where you painted the abandoned houses.
Yeah.
I'm like, I wish I would have done that. You know, I think about those type of things because I had this whole body of work I created. It was called Welcome to Monument City, which was considered the term for Baltimore at one time because it had the most monuments in America before the big fire, I think at the turn of the century or something like that. And I was just thinking about when you are in these neighborhoods now where things are boarded up, it kind of reminded me of watching like the History Channel. You know, when you say the ruins of Rome or the ruins of Pompeii, that's what I think about when I see these places abandoned. I know people live there. I know things that existed there. For me, it's not even like a thing of being sad or being moved emotionally. For me, I realized that, you know, things do change. Yeah. Geographically, we move around.
But people see that as the pain is from the injustice.
Yes.
So if you as a layperson know the whole history of why it looks like that, you can't unburden yourself from that.
Yes.
And so it was 20 years of education and spending a lot of money to go to Greece and Rome. And I was like, well, we got ruins. Do I need to just light it a certain way and then everybody will come?
Exactly.
And so it really was like, what do Black people love? Black Chicago people love Ultra Sheen. So what happens if you apply it? Will they know? Or will they think? Even people that didn't get it right away, they were just like, why would you give so much love to something? And I said, why wouldn't you?
Exactly.
So we have these great conversations on the street about these properties. And then when they find out the deeper meaning, then it's the laugh, it's the fun, it's the memory, a whole story. It's like, well, you an expert. Don't let anybody else talk bad about this again. These are our great ruins. Nothing is actually supposed to live forever. So these stories about the grandeur of these kinds of places is because there's maintenance. And we don't have that. We've been denied that. And so this was also that way of like, actually, it's just Home Depot paint. And a Sunday.
And I think that's so important too.
It's still a lot of work.
It's so important to understand the idea that, and I think it's important and it's happening within your practice. And I believe I also consider these things is that it doesn't take maintenance and care doesn't always equal financial elevation of something. Like you said, it's a fresh coat of paint from Home Depot. You can buy the mist paint from Home Depot that's cheaper. I mean, there's things that I think that we've actually been doing, implementing in a way of necessity that we as a cultural group sometimes don't necessarily consider as being as radical as it is.
Yes.
I think that we do things out of necessity that has a trickle up effect that becomes mainstream or become the standard for social practices and things that we have been doing for a long period of time. So when you think about even the term social practice, I think I've always done social practice.
I was confused actually.
Yeah. I was like social practice, like hanging out with people talking,
right,
educating people about stuff. I thought that was, to me, was interesting because, I ran this gallery, which you've shown in before, Rush Arts Gallery in Chelsea. And at one time, when Black artists were never selling much, galleries only were social practice spaces because
correct.
It was all about educating people about what you're looking at, and people even trying to kind of socialize people to understand the importance of looking at art and not thinking of it as being this kind of elite part of encounters with visual culture.
Right.
And so most of the time when we would have an opening, it would just be like a live band, food, wine, and art,
Like
and
fourth.
So, it was like all these different things because we thought like if people are going to come, they need to have something to drink, they need to have some food, they need to have music. I think that kind of goes extended from like the church experience, the community experience, going into like this kind of gallery space, but also thinking about how people start to understand the importance. And I even remember when I shifted from having this kind of experience where, I started working with younger artists and exhibiting younger artists as a gallery curator. But then I realized, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't have food. Maybe we shouldn't have music. Maybe we should just have art. People should just look at art. And I remember when I had that whole thing, when I realized the food and other things that were part of it was it was almost like a performance thing.
Or a distraction.
Yeah, it was distractions. But I feel like with art and the way that the language of art and really focusing back on your work and your paintings and the idea of color and the systems that are kind of created around the work you made, I feel like the work is inclusive of all those things in a way that it brings all these experiences that would be through taste or whatever in this object that kind of captures history in a way that is just more provocative. And also, again, with abstraction, you have to yield for it.
Yeah.
And really look at it and really understand certain aspects of influence, interpretation.
But it's an access point too. I can remember somebody was asking me about abstraction, and I said, well, I was trained like everybody else in representation, but the architecture was the tipping point because I had to be able to draw one line that said a wall, something that didn't exist, something that was behind you, line under the ground, electrical systems. So the weight of that line, a dash in that line, a doubling of that line, a poche of that line. So everybody knew how to draw lines, but now that line has to mean 52 things. And I can't be there to tell the person that sees the line what it means. Yeah. It's like, are you serious? This is what we're really doing here in school. It's like the revelation of that. And so then an abstraction in art is not a far leap. No. Because now you're going to the kind of elemental meaning of the shapes or the forms or the colors or whatever your palette of things are that you use. But then you always remembering whoever on 79th Street. And so can they relate to this? Yeah. And so for me, the color was that segue because people can always kind of connect once they have that basic understanding. For me, it's been a struggle to not give too many breadcrumbs or to just completely liberate myself. And then to realize that people trust now that if they believe I'm an artist and that they believe in what I'm doing, that they will stay with the work. Yeah. People that never would have done that before. And then obviously community of people that I trained with in a formal sense, of course, they have an immediate entree into the work. So they can evaluate it on these plastics that we all learned at the same time. Form, composition, color, materiality, texture, all these things. But it really is always important for me to have that balance. And so I think both of us have done this great job of constantly doing work that's completely accessible. Some swim trunks. Exactly. And then performance, residency where you have to rest. I wonder sometimes though if that's because we both came obliquely into the contemporary art sphere. So you were such a champion for artists as an administrator. And so when you went back to school, I was like, what is he? I don't understand. Why is he doing that? And then the work was so beautiful and amazing. It's like, why wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
And me coming from architecture, I think people were sort of like, oh, she can paint too? I didn't realize that. All of that stuff is mixed into our experiences because we have had to both and our whole lives.
Yeah.
You got to navigate this neighborhood and that environment, this kind of person and that kind of person. So it comes naturally to the work that we make. So I bet you don't even think about how many times you oscillate between something very complicated and niche and something very like Jolly Ranchers.
That's exactly what I was thinking when I saw the painting. I said, that's the Jolly Rancher wild apple flavor.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? The green.
People can taste these paints, I promise you.
Great, and just the idea of like the watermelon flavor. And that's one thing I was talking about when I was driving through Baltimore. What I was remembering is what I would get before I went to school. I would get like this bag of candy and go to school in the morning, like hyped up. When kids, back in those days, there was no whole idea about like being hyper before school. You get the change, you go do whatever you want with it.
Right.
You buy the candy, you just don't get caught eating it in school.
And somehow we thought watermelon was healthy. Or I can distinctly remember it was like, well, that's healthy. It's got apple in it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you're like, do you know any green apples?
But the color is just such a dominant part of like looking at communities, like looking at architecture.
Yes.
What I do credit, and I'm really excited that I had the opportunity to be educated in an institutional way because it helped me to understand the value systems of my community in a way that I would not have thought about before.
No, we take for granted, or people will say, oh, there's no color, or our architecture's bad, or it's so drab. And then we start naming things and people are like, oh yeah. And then they start in on the process, right? So like, well, what about green apple? And then you see the colors used, to your point about value systems, as a way to kind of outpace your neighbor, especially in New York or big centers, as flair.
Yes.
So you're like, what's going to be my color this season? Well, high-end fashion houses are doing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
They have no knowledge of that. And so that's the irony, or the kind of crazy part of the whole situation, is that there was some assumption that we weren't engaging in the same desires to have beauty and pleasure and humor. And so now that, to your point about the global, now that that's meshed, there's this exciting explosion all of a sudden.
What is so important about, this idea of the institutional experience as a visual artist, you really start to kind of think about deconstruction in a certain particular type of way. You start to think about inspiration in a particular way. If you're fortunate, you're able to teach that in a particular way that we weren't taught necessarily in a particular way. So, of course, it's important to understand history. It's important to look at yourself as an artist and understand the relationship to your practice and your peers and the times before you. But I think it's essential more than ever for artists to really tap into the things that kind of connect us as humans, things that are just sensations that we feel through history and through our experience on a ground level. And I really think that it's important for, works like yours and mine and other artists that are kind of really thinking about, I think about non-art people more than art people.
Right.
Right. As an art person, we're taught to walk into a gallery and look at how crowded the work is in the show. That's what we look at. Like, oh, they didn't really need that extra piece in the show. They could have held that back. Or the walls weren't as smooth as I thought it would be in this space. Then we look at the work.
Right.
Then we might look at the art and look at the idea. And this is through training of being critical, which we are taught to question, to probe, and those things. And it's significant. But I'm always more fascinated with people who are not as invested in the institution of art. And to me, I think they're the toughest clients for me because they're not invested. They don't have to care. They can walk by it and not say anything. And if they don't say anything, it's not because they're withholding information because they don't want to give you praise or like an institution.
They're just not connected to it.
It doesn't mean anything.
But then they're the biggest champions.
And I feel like I'm way more accomplished when my aunts or someone come in and like what I'm doing and can like explain to other people or talk about what it means to them as it relates to, or just someone on the street or security sometimes when I'm in the museum context or something, or if I walk into a show where I have work and I see the guards like talking about my work to people who are
There's
in the
nothing
museum.
better than that.
That's the best feeling, because to be in a space and to be inspired by a community and have that work brought into a space and have representatives of that community that I feel attached to speaking on behalf of the iconography and the symbolism and things that I feel are so important to the anchoring of the work, to have someone actually decipher it and decode it without me being there.
Yes.
Is amazing.
Or whole new ways you didn't.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't think of that.
You put that there for this, didn't you? And I'm like, yes,
I'm like,
of course
yes,
I did.
And
Of course I did.
I'll go change my statement, gonna add that line in there. It's like, sometimes, you're so close to it that you actually need someone from your community to come in and decipher it. Because again, the institutional education distort things sometimes, so you got to constantly remind yourself, where is this coming from? Who's inspiring me,
And you've adopted those systems too. People ask, and it's hard to parse out. And it's like, is this sensibility from modernism or is this from 79th Street? And then at some point you're like, it doesn't matter. It's all me. And here it is. And you decide how you want to look at it. I think
we like modernism. We like modernism.
There's nothing right.
We love
That's the irony. That's what baffles me. It's like, this is not a rejection of that. This is actually the best case scenario where I've learned that and applied it here.
Yeah.
That's even more exciting to me. But what would happen if we could do it the reverse?
Exactly.
But I think that's coming. Like, you're part of my daughter's art curriculum. So her entire class.
I love that.
And they're like, Simone Lee does this, Derrick Adams does that. That's just a given for them. And so to imagine if that's the baseline, what is the feedback chamber of that kind of baseline? Not that we didn't have greats that we were learning about, but it was very much like, well, Jacob Lawrence is for this. And, Mondrian is for this. I can remember at Cornell, it was a controversy to have an African-American art appreciation class.
Yeah, and it wasn't even a requirement. It was like an extra.
And don't you know, all of us signed up for it. So then there were 50 people for the class.
Wow.
So because we knew the politics of if this class doesn't go, then we're not going to get it again. So it's like, there's a waiting list. Oh, well, we have to have 2 of these.
That's beautiful.
Well, you should hire someone. We understood that we had to be emphasizing the importance of this. It's so crazy now, in less than 30 years, to be the educators. So we are the subjects, but we also are the educators that are experts. So now we're sought after in this way because we have the lived experience, but we also have the technical background to then teach that. I mean, that's a lot we're not that old.
No, I think more so our generation particularly are way more exposed than the generation that inspired us.
Yes.
When I think about a lot of the artists, not even thinking about like Jacob or Emma Amos and those artists, thinking about artists who were just out here, doing what they had to do at a particular time. Artists who kind of came into their own in the 90s, maybe, out here kind of just working. And for most Black artists, it was the level of exposure started for them through more of the academic platform because the monetary thing was not happening.
Right.
So the intellectual programs that really talked about ideas related to art and to art making and culture became the best avenue for Black artists internationally at one point. Now we have all of these things happening for us and around us. And so there's so many different avenues to take as artists, which is great. And I think that which is really interesting about now in looking at references, as we were talking about school and class. I remember we had like one presentation in art history, was like Henry O. Tanner was the only artist they did a slide in my art history class at Pratt when I was there. But I knew there were more. The thing is, it's more. It's more.
If it's one.
You're like, why are you teaching more? It's more. And the thing is, for me, the reason why I went back to grad school, because I understood the importance of abstraction. I understand the importance of figuration, conceptual art, installation, performance coming from Black artists. It was a pretty normal experience for me as a curator, as an artist at that time in that community of artists. But what I realized is that even though I knew all of these artists and they were so big in my world, they were not big in everyone's world. And that's what made me go to grad school, because I realized that I need to be in the space to let people know about these artists.
Yeah.
That's why I went to grad school. I went to grad school so I can bring what I learned in this gallery experience, this nonprofit experience, into a world where I felt would not come to me. I would have to go to them, go to it. And so my purpose for going to grad school wasn't because I thought it was going to make me a better artist. I thought it would be more of a conversation. I wanted to know why people didn't know what I knew. I wanted to know why people didn't know Ed Clark and why people didn't know Howard Dean and Pindell. I wanted to know what people are looking at for them not to know this. And I also knew how much better all the artists would be in grad school who were doing these things if they knew these artists.
If they had this frame of reference.
Yeah, I was like,
Jack Whitten
is
just as great as Richter. Yeah.
Exactly. I was thinking like, if anything in grad school, when I realized the gaps is that I felt like we're just going to be regurgitating this stuff if you guys don't have new and interesting options beyond what we keep seeing in school. And I felt more like it's going to help you guys out. It's not even necessarily about being black or white as an abstract artist or whatever. You need more references to what you're doing, because what you're doing is just regurgitating what I'm looking at too and you're looking at. So the options are so minimal that we need to expand our understanding of process, materiality, content, context by seeing other artists come into our view, Black, Asian, Latin, all those different things are going to make everybody good. Like it wasn't just about me being good. It was like, no, you need a little bit of Howard Dean and Pindell in your slide list. You need a little bit of Ed Clark. You need some Frank Boland in there. I thought when I would see things happening in school, I would just think that it's certain artists that I think would really benefit you seeing them from a perspective of just a maker and a thinker.
Yes.
And a person that kind of produce things based on context that relates to them, how it can also relate to you, or things that you could kind of reflect on as other things that are not related to this artist process, but also understand process. I felt like that was the thing I was thinking about. And when I went to grad school and thought about the experience of going to grad school and what would happen, I was really thinking about positioning in a way of how I'm doing now as an educator. When I mean positioning, I don't mean necessarily as successful artist. I meant more as in to be an educator is the biggest influence you can have on any culture.
Beautiful.
Because you actually are exposing people, you're having these conversations about things that sometimes unforgettable. Like being an educator is the biggest level of influence you can have on a person.
To bring it full circle, I've been obsessing about the green books forever, but haven't figured out yet how I want to express that. I think I'm caught up too much in having a background of building things.
Yeah.
So I'm very literal about the mapping of it, and I can't free myself. So when you started your green books, I was like, yes, look, oh my God, the road is driving. Like all these very basic things. But the number of people that had no idea about that story.
Yeah, so many
These
people.
are Black people too, right?
Yeah.
I was shocked. And so there's the educating also in the content, but already moving it past a very one-dimensional reading of it. So It's not like you're mimicking the book, but you took it to a whole other level immediately. So they're getting the initial history and then also in a way to see more because you're abstracting it already so much. And so I think for us, the excitement a lot of people have is it's either a story they didn't know about and they trust now that we're bringing it to them, or they did know it and now we're adding value to it, right? But the educating is coming, not even just in teaching in the classroom, but the work itself. Like somebody will leave and then go back and be like, well, what is the history of candy? Well, did you know sugar was this?
Exactly.
Well, slaves were traded for sugar. Like so many levels. So you see it on a very cursory, kind of syrupy, sugary, summertime.
You can't really do it. And the thing is like, as artists, as Black artists, we can't really do everything. We can't.
No.
I always think a lot, when I was doing the work inspired by the Green Book, the series called Sanctuary. And I was thinking about Victor Hugo and his wife, Alma Green, who spent their time, he was a postal worker. By day, he would come home with his wife and compile this data to make this directory. When I made the work, I was thinking about what was he trying to do?
Right.
He was interested in the geography and the movement of how to move Black people around safely. That was his interest.
Key was the safety.
That was it. Even in the description in the front of the book, he didn't even mention anything about the traumatic experience that Black people were having in their travel and the reason why he made it. If anything, I remember he wrote something very eloquent. He said he created this green book as a temporary solution. He didn't think it was going to be, he was hoping that it wouldn't be necessary all the time. He thought like, I'm just doing this now.
Yes.
But hopefully this would not need to exist for a long period of time. And I did this so you won't have to endure any embarrassing situation. I think that was like the term.
Right.
He didn't even say like hostile or traumatic. He thought of it in the form of dignity. He thought even then that he knew, like that's the thing about, you know, the idea of the structure that we kind of have to operate around and through is that we understand the values, this value of self.
Yes.
Even if the world doesn't necessarily think about these value systems as being important for us or these ideas of value in our community and for our body, we constantly reassure each other about our value, our self-value as a community. And I think for us as artists, it kind of trickles down into our psyche when we're making work. Like, I don't even think like I'm going to make something for Black people when I'm making work. Like, I don't think like that.
No.
I just think I'm Black, so what else am I going to make? But something that hopefully if I'm a good communicator, Black people will get it and understand it and realize that it comes from observing culture, from looking within, all those things. But I don't go to my studio saying that when I'm working on my stuff. You know what I'm saying?
What am I going to do for Blacks?
Yeah, what I'm gonna do? What I'm gonna make? You know, I don't think like that, but I realize that if you are engaged in these conversations with your peers and people who are much influence. My aunts are a bigger influence on me than anything else. I have like a really tight group, like a clan of strong Black women who.
Your kitchen cabinet.
Yes. When they come visit, you know, in Baltimore, the residency, one of my aunts, she texted me or she called me. She said, heard you were in town. Is it okay for your aunts to come over? What time can we come over? I said, okay, come around 6. They'll come and they'll talk about everything. Like when they were younger, when they got older, they might have the same conversation over and over again. But I just love it because I like hearing them retell it.
Yes.
Because they tell it with a certain level of animation, or they may add something they forgot last time, or they might just repeat exactly the way they did.
Or embellish it.
Yes, and I love it. It's the best performance ever. And I grew up in that environment. My mother had 10 siblings. She made 11. And it was like a conversation about everything, about decor, about fashion, about home improvement. These conversations they were having. Like, you can't paint this and then, like, even with decorate, you can't paint a house this and do that trim. I don't like that color. What do you think about, you know, it was that kind of conversation all the time. When I think about color, I remember, you know, again, growing up in church, and that was when things had to match.
Yes. Come on with it. Come on. The
things
hat,
had to match.
your socks.
Had to be the same shade. It couldn't even be an off shade. I remember when I was a kid, my aunts would be calling each other on the phone. They'll be at the mall, different places, getting shoes, pantyhose. They would call each other and say, girl, when you're out, I got this red dress. They would bring it to your house.
So you could see.
Yeah, so you can see the dress. Say, this is the red dress. If you're out and you see some tights to go with this dress, pick them out for me. Or you see some shoes to go with this. And it was a thing, like everyone did it. Like it wasn't like one person would do it.
Right.
They would go pick it out. Oh, they would say, oh, this sister was looking for this shoe. I think I found your shoe, girl. It's at this mall. So the idea of like value and color and texture and objects and how they related to each other was always something that was so part of my culture, our culture. I think, you know, like for me, it's more of a challenge and more of an interest for me to tap into that part of my psyche of understanding color and relationships, and more exciting for me on a daily basis than to think about the institutional element of my structuring as an artist.
Well, I mean, I'm always emphasizing, and I know in terms of your process, we're very tactile people. And despite having an ability to use computer or other technologies to kind of answer the question for you, I spent an inordinate amount of time trying to get the memory of the color.
Yeah.
So it was critical at every stage. You know, people were like, well, are you getting the outside of the Cheetos bag? Or is it dust on your fingers? Or, you know, so that was like a month-long study. Like, you didn't look at the dust. Is it that color? I don't know, right? And then literally calling the Home Depot people, I need this orange. Not this one, not this one. What is this orange? You know, and then working to like get the exact thing, right? Or the green apple. Because it's the memory, like you have to trigger the memory for these audiences versus the technical.
Yeah.
So we were able to nail the technical rather quickly. And then even with that, it's like, is anybody gonna look at that painting and say,
that's a
look
Cheeto?
like pineapple to you?
Yeah.
Is that Cheeto?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that really strawberry now later? You know, so it didn't matter that it was exact. It was then. That's when the training does come in, when you can start to pair. This is when traditional color theory works for us, right? People are like, how does Derrick get the colors of his skin like that? It's like, you know, he's actually trained. Exactly. Because the subject matter is so light sometimes, or on the surface it seems so straightforward, people miss out on this idea of like how important the source material and then matching that.
A lot of times they do, you know?
It's really critical. It's not just that red, or he's kind of got some brown skin tones, or you know, it's like, well, there's a green in there too, like that kind of level of.
And it's important for them to know, like, the idea of, like, again, you spend a lot of time looking for color. That's not always important for the viewer to know. I'm interested in process. I'm interested in material, but I'm not interested in the process being the entry into observing, to looking at the work. The success of the candy store or the candy lady or these things that are inspiring for the work is that they
transcend it almost. Right?
Yes, you just believe it. You're not questioning the candy lady. You just know that she's there. And when I hear candy lady, just in my mind, it makes me think of this woman who, in my grandmother's neighborhood, she would sell barbecue sandwiches out of her trunk.
Yes. Yes, they were good too.
She would drive through the neighborhood, she would open up her trunk. She would have like the barbecue on the bun, and a little plastic Ziploc or a little baggie to sell. And those things were just part of the culture. It was another woman who sold like fish dinners on Fridays.
Yes.
She made homemade rolls. People would go to her house on Friday. She would take orders. They made frozen cups. I don't know if you know what those things are.
Yeah, we call them icy cups.
Yeah, frozen cups. That was the thing. The same woman who sold the frozen cups, she also pierced everyone's ear.
This is what I mean about these are the bosses too.
Yeah, exactly, yes.
That was the person you knew just didn't play.
Yeah.
And it also might be the one that like got you out of trouble or got you in trouble because you weren't where you were supposed to be. Like,
exactly.
These are pillars of the community, and they just did it. It wasn't like, oh, Mrs. So-and-so is a pillar of the community. It's like,
no, she just did it.
Go ask her because she'll know.
Yeah.
Or it's Friday. You better go get your fish. It's almost gone.
Yeah.
Or
it's
right.
Time to get your ear pierced. You gotta go to Miss Jean. And you know what was so funny about the idea of the physical relationship to community is that people knew that Miss Jean pierced your ear because it was always a little off. You know what I'm saying? Like people knew they were like, Miss Jean pierced your ears, didn't she? Sometimes the thing would be a little low where it's supposed to be, you know. And so that was kind of like her mark on the community, kind of basically having this woman who had the ice cube, and then she would have the little string, and then a little piece of the broom, the straw burn it in the air, you know. But it was just all these different things that had to do with ritual in the community. But for me as an artist, this is all source material.
Endless.
This is source material
and
for
so
me.
joyful. Like I think that's the work has joy, but in the making of the work, it's also so joyful because you're just remembering these things, you're laughing.
Yeah.
And you're like, how am I going to be a little off?
Yeah.
So for the people that know, they should be able to come and be like,
I want to be a little off. I want to be a little off, you know what I'm saying? Because in my work, when I'm making stuff, there's an opportunity where I know there's an element on a painting or a sculpture that if I fix it, it will be perfect.
Right.
And I won't.
Right.
I said, no, I'm going to leave it like that because I just feel like the idea of something being off or something being a bit unraveled, it's like when you're speaking to someone who has a string hanging off their sweater.
Yes.
And you're looking at that string. And while they're talking, you're still, and you hope, and if you really care for them, you might just like tuck it in, or you might fix the collar. But
right, or the
idea,
tag.
The tag. But I think that it makes people more present. And when things are perfect, they feel a distance between the object.
Right.
That they're observing the object only. But when things have a little bit of like string hanging off them, or the button's loose, the idea of attention shifts. Mm-hmm. And it becomes way more connected with each other.
What do you think the balance of the hand is then? Because if it does feel too perfect, you're not convinced the person made it. I mean, just in your psyche, right? If it's too handiwork, then people decide it's craft or they could have done it.
Yeah.
Right, so where's that line along the spectrum, right? Like, I think that's a hard decision too, the moment where you're like, no, let me let this be off, or you see the fingerprint, or that one is cut just wrong, or you can see the tape or the glue or the...
I think it's like a balance, I think, because like, again, I keep going back to like the women in my family. You know, I remember like now everyone gets renovations when they do their kitchen. Like they get a whole new kitchen, they ripped out. When I grew up, my grandmother would just put contact paper everywhere. So you couldn't just keep replacing your cabinets. So the idea that every year around Christmas time, around Easter,
you just change out the paper.
You change out the paper. You make your own curtains. If you went to, you know, McCall, whatever the place, Joann Fabrics, they would go buy the fabric. They would take the contact paper to the place. They would match it. They would create something for that spring season, summer, winter. They would change out and make some other stuff. But, you know, it was a certain level of care involved with that. And I think, like to me, when I think about things being finished and unfinished, to me is a question of care. I feel at a certain point through my experience and age, I can look at something and see if it was unfinished with care versus unfinished without care.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? It's two different things. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes, you know, like for instance, you go to someone's house, if the way the table is set up, it could be super formal, or it could be participatory. Right. It could be something where they're waiting for people to come so we can actually sit at the table together and organize this thing. Both things are very much ending with the same festivity of eating together, but one thing is being considerate of the audience, the guests, those things, being mindful of their habits, the way they engage, just things that are important. But the idea of care is such an important part. So when I think about making art, I always think like, what would an old black lady do? That's what I do. I think like that all the time.
Do you really?
Yeah, all the time. I'm like, you know, just the idea, what would an old black lady do at a particular time? Not with technology. What would an old black woman do if she had a very limited budget? That's the black experience.
Yes.
A limited budget, but you want to have a big outcome.
Right.
So how can you do that? You know what I'm saying?
Still the same aspirations. In addition to the Candy Lady, when I started to think about this idea of CEO or bosses or these entrepreneurs to kind of make it happen, then I thought about these television figures too. And so around the same time, at least for me, was the spectrum of Florida Evans and Dominique Devereaux. So this was groundbreaking for all kinds of reasons I didn't understand about Diane Carroll and previous roles, and now she's rich, and black people who drink champagne, the whole range. But it was like the same things were going on. So Florida Evans is like, set the table. Michael, get the rolls. She's got on dusters that are exquisite with their color pattern. You know, the house is immaculate.
Always.
You know, we're concerned with how we look when we go out. Put your overcoat on. Despite the limitations in the financials, there still is that. I'm constantly interested also in bringing that back to like, whether you were educated or you weren't, whether you're middle class or not. We come from people. We come from things, right? And so we still do. And so that's the missing part of the narrative right now. On a daily basis, it's like, well, that is someone's child, and also I'm someone's child. So like, you can't steal my car. But there's a reason why you are stealing cars, right? There's an understanding on that spectrum, but the infusion of like, we had this, and actually we still have it. It's just not foregrounded anymore. So how do we make sure that you understand that, so that educating is there too, right? In terms of like, the aunts come in every time telling the same story. Because we need to hear the same story.
I love it.
Or they play in the dozens, or they one-upping each other, or they call and response. My father-in-law would tell the same story of meeting my mother-in-law. And each time he would add something that wasn't true.
And I would just listen.
And I'd be waiting on it. It'd be like Sunday, he's coming. And then she'd say, oh, Lee. And then so whenever she said that, that part was not true. But then we'd be like, well, did she buy it? Did she get the milkshake? You know, and he's like, oh yeah. And then say, well, what flavor was it? And he said,
You know, no. Like, but you start getting, you realize it's not really about the story. It's about the relationship that you have. And those things to me are become such a central part of just my creative experience. It's kind of interesting too, like having my aunts come to visit me in Baltimore at the residency. I kind of clear my whole schedule for them to come. And I order food because I know they're going to come. And my whole thing is to facilitate their comfort for them to talk. So they don't have to worry about like, I'm hungry, or you eating food here? Like I set the whole stage for them.
But my family's ready now, because I'll make them do some work too. Like I'll just slide some paper and I'll be like, well, draw the house in Birmingham.
Oh, really?
and they'll draw 6 different houses.
Wow.
Their age range
Yeah.
is huge. And then they just remember different stuff. So you'd be like, no, Big Mama's room was in the back. It's like, no, it wasn't. That's where the furnace was. It's like, Daddy had this on the porch. And then they're arguing.
Yeah.
Now, I've been told this story 8 times, so I really could sketch it perfectly.
Yeah,
I know what a
love it.
shotgun
I love
house
it.
looks like,
Yeah.
right? But the scale of how they draw, they'll argue, they'll correct each other, and then you like slightly connect, And they're like, she's about to go make some art,
Yeah, yeah.
It's like they're used to it now. They're like, and she's calling with questions. But to set the table for that is our heirlooms in a way.
So I love it. To me, I think that's all the inspiration I need at this point in my life as an artist, is just staying connected to these elders in my family and just being a follower of them in some ways, because I feel like they're leaders. And for me, it's more about being quiet when I'm around them. I really don't talk that much when I just listen, because I feel so privileged to experience them talking about.
But how are we going to extend that? The work is the lineage.
I think if anything, what they see, I'm hoping that they see from my work outside of their conversations, is that I'm listening in some way. You know what I'm saying? Like, look at my work and say, he's really listening. He was listening to us. Again, there's so many different things that Black people have experienced in life, in this place, in the world. And what we remember about these experiences, good and bad, are kind of what really shapes us and sustain us in a certain way. And what I appreciate about my family, blue collar, hardworking, all own their own houses, most of them are retired. When they get together, I know they all experience traumatic things. I have been around to see these things. But when I see them together, they're just laughing and talking about stuff. I rarely seen my aunts cry unless it's a death in the family,
right?
Or something tragic happen. But on a daily basis, they're more like, this needs to get done.
But even the joy is the perseverance. I was joking with a friend of mine. She said, my uncle died. And I said, the funeral wedding is coming. She was like, you know it. When we get together, Aunt so-and-so has always got to upstage Aunt so-and-so. And then there's an argument about the food. Well, who drew the thing on the program? Which photograph to use? It's like that same energy is our baseline of kind of what we know to be community. But there's always like the ability to turn it into the levity or to the satire. That's what Black comedy is so great about. It's like, as soon as something tragic in the world happens, there's always the cousin that too soon is coming in with the joke or the thing or the. This is traumatic. And it's like,
hearing that made me think about the idea of death, because I'm laughing, but I also realized that if I had to sum up my whole creative experience and the influence on me, I would definitely go back to highlighting an aspect of my family that I think is mind-blowing for most people who hear. In my family, my aunts, if someone passes away, another woman, one of my aunts makes the dress for her.
Yeah.
Whatever color was her favorite color, my aunt makes that dress. My other cousin, who's a beautician, does the person's hair. The other person does the makeup of that person for the funeral.
It's the ultimate in care.
Yeah, and to me, that's mind-blowing. And these people are not even people who are just around a lot of death all the time. Like, they just look beyond the idea of death and like the idea of what does this person want to look like in that coffin. You know what I'm saying?
When my father died, he died unexpectedly. And my brother and I can remember so distinctly. And my brother literally said, he said, we got to close out this dude's life the way he lived.
Yeah.
And so when I tell you everything was in order, because that's how James Williams showed up. So it's like, go for the extra thing on the thing.
Yeah.
Well, get the light blue, because he liked that.
Yeah.
Well, that tie is not right.
Yeah.
Well, let's have someone in come get that line correct. It's like,
you got to do
just the minutia of everything. And it took us 2 years before we were like, our dad died.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, hold on.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
That's what I mean.
We had to nail it. The music, you're going to be 2 minutes late because he was always late, but not too late because he kept himself together.
When I reflect on the idea of struggle or the idea of oppressive, navigating the oppressive structure, which I think is pretty consistent with our existence here in the world, here in this place, I also present it with this idea of perseverance. Like, perseverance actually overpowers my idea of thinking about like struggle. For some reason, like, automatically jump right to perseverance.
Yeah.
Like,
And
but then they did
resilience.
that, but they still did this. They didn't have this, but they did that. You know, the idea of it, or as Black people, when people say like, how do you grow up? Most Black people in America, even if they grew up with money, they have family members who did not have money. So it's not like if you grew up rich, you still didn't go to your grandmother's house who may have lived in the hood. So the idea of like kind of categorization of like economy and how we kind of move around, it doesn't really line up with the way that people think about the standard of living in America.
Yes.
Because people usually think that you move out of places and you don't go back to those places because you're like at a different place. But that's not normally how Black people operate, because you always have like a cousin or an aunt.
100% of the time.
It might be your favorite
and
cousin.
And if you don't, then you're lying.
You're lying. Everyone has that setup that I grew up with, where we have cousins who lived an hour away. They might have had 13 acres of land next to another family member who may live in an apartment on this side of town. So the idea of economic structure, I think, for the Black community is not as linear or not as carved out as other communities.
That's right.
When they think about where you fit into this kind of middle class, lower class perspective, because the ultimate goal for my family is that no one needed anything, regardless of where you lived or whatever. We had people who would fill in the gap for people who needed things and people who did things in other barter systems of operating to kind of just sustain ourselves as a group.
So this Candy Lady series is actually inspired by what Black is, as you say, because there's a flattening that happened in 2020 when it was like, we stand with Black lives. And immediately, I don't know if it's the resilience or the survival, my first thought was, what about the ones that put the utility bill in the child's name? Like, them Black, are you in solidarity with them Black people? Because they actually need the solidarity.
Yeah, exactly.
But are you talking about me?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly.
And my lovely coiffed attire.
Yeah, it's different.
They wear house shoes outside, or you bring your own styrofoam before the function even started and make to-go plates. Like which Blacks?
Yeah,
which ones?
So there's different ones.
It's a lot of them.
It's a lot.
And so, I rattled off 150 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And then people can see themselves, or I would change the tense so that if you don't really want to admit that you get your pork rinds from Whole Foods, then I just say we or they.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, people literally were writing me, strangers. They were like, you see me. Do you see me in the Whole Foods? It's like, just see you. And my cousin and my neighbor. But that's either part of your experience or it's part of your indirect experience that you can either embrace or you can let go.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
But you know all of those Blacks.
Oh, yeah.
And if you don't, now you do.
Because they're around, and I think
it might be.
Exactly. And it might be me, or it might be me, you know what I'm saying?
You be looking around
like, where are they?
Talking about?
Exactly. Like
me,
I'm us.
Yes.
We are us. You know
we are us. And so that was important with the they, we, you used to sometimes. So I would start them like that, and then people would be just like, just because you have Black friends doesn't mean that I'm your Black friend Black. And it was like, tell it, say it again. It would conjure all of these ways that Blackness has been flattened.
Yeah.
When it's not. It's exactly what you said. It's not linear in that same way. We either embrace it and it works for us, or we're in denial for a long time. And then when we do own it, you're so much the better for it, right? When you're like,
it's the best.
Yeah, I got that cousin that can't come to the function.
Yeah, exactly.
And everyone knows
we
it,
have
you
that,
know?
And I think that's the difference between the institutional world is that that cousin is not invited because he can't act right. He's not acting right. Or she's not acting right. So they're invited to this particular function because it's more curated.
Yes.
But the idea of family in the community that we represent is that it wouldn't be a party without this level of dysfunction being present. We all collectively had to just watch this person and make sure that they act right. You know what I'm saying?
And you know that too, right?
Yeah. Everyone knows that. Everyone's alerted that this person's coming. And that's how we have to kind of deal with this person, you know, not vigorously.
Right.
But we got to pay attention because we don't know who this person might end up arguing with.
Usually called in as a deflector.
Yeah.
A girlfriend of mine in college got married, and before the wedding, she said, okay, I'm gonna need you to be with Aunt so-and-so. And she didn't have to explain beyond that.
Yeah.
And it was like Aunt so-and-so had some things going on. She was picking stuff up off of tables and putting them in pockets. And so I was the one that had to just stay with Aunt so-and-so so it went smooth. And there was no need to discuss it. It wasn't like, what do you mean?
Well,
why would she do that?
Exactly.
Who is she?
Yeah.
But it's like, she gotta be here and the things gotta go right. Right?
See, that's important. I'm that person who always says, we got to invite this person. Most of the people are like, no, we're not going to invite this person. I said, you can't have this thing without this person here. I was like, they're going to find out that we had this thing and they weren't invited. And so we have to really think about community as it relates to everything, because it's also, again, going back to our practice, I don't think I can make a good piece of work if I'm curating my experience of how I intake.
Yes.
I don't think I can make a good piece of work without thinking about that cousin, that uncle, that aunt, that neighbor.
That's the richness.
Yeah.
That's the depth, right?
Yeah.
And in many ways, it's no different than the aunts coming to talk.
Yes. Yes.
Because it's the dynamism somehow we're able to bring to the work, or so many of our peers right now.
Yeah.
I think that's the unspoken power, the thing that people are gravitating towards. It's like we have the depth there.
Yes.
There's the beauty on the surface, but there's so much more.
So getting back to the idea, of that relative coming, is going back to the idea of that string hanging from your shirt, from your sweater. You know what I'm saying? That makes it more interesting. Yeah. I think about that in my practice in the studio. When we get to a certain point, and I think it has to do with maturity and life experience and understanding histories and different things, I think we both have a grasp on what is perfection, or the idea of it, the construct of it.
Yes.
As we relate to our community, and that becomes a source, I think, for my work as well as yours, looking at the community, we understand that it's not perfect.
Right.
So the idea...
But it's just right.
But it's just right. It's just right. And it's growing, and it's influencing. And when I'm in my studio and I get not stuck, but if I feel like I'm depleted sometimes creatively, I just go to the store. I just walk to the corner store, or I'll sit at a bench at the park and watch people walk down the street. And I'm like, oh, that person. I'm gonna go back to my studio. Yes. I'm like that. I think if I need to be inspired, I can either go online or go to the Schomburg or places like that and do the research, which I do. But if I really want to create something uniquely representational of this space, this time, these people today, I need to walk outside. When I look at your work and talk to you about your work and read about your work, I feel like you go outside. Huh? You know what I'm saying?
We outside.
We go outside. Yeah.
I mean, not only that, but I'm the person that draws the story. So it's like a running joke in my family that I can go nowhere without coming back with a good story. So I don't know if it's my face and, symmetry or some kind of balance and people feel like they can tell me their life. I tried once to get on the Green Line in Chicago, and I was going to ride from 63rd and Cottage downtown and talk to no one. That was the goal. Yeah. That's the terminus. Before the train started. Now it's empty. Yeah. This lady comes and she checks the trains and she comes and sits right next to me. She's like, girl, I almost went to jail. And then it started from there. That's a whole series. You know what I mean? We didn't even, the train didn't even take off yet. So outside, engaging people. Yeah. And also I think people are surprised when you engage them for no reason. Yeah. And so there's a valuation that goes with that. And so that's my default. Yeah. And so I'm going to let the person ramble with their story as much as I'm going to engage the person who's supposed to be engaging. And I think that, to your point, it's like endless source material. Yeah. Sometimes I try to step back, but often I'm just inserting myself into that conversation in the aunt's table. Not in a disruptive way, but enough so that it gets going. Yeah, you keep, and you get the back and forth.
It's because there's a lot of space in between sometimes when you don't, because also you realize there sometimes the structuring of it. It's also almost for selfish reasons sometimes. Yes. You start thinking oh, I need a little bit more. Yes. I need a little bit more details about these things because I think this is important. The thing that I enjoy the most when I interrupt or add is they're surprised sometimes at my memory of something. Yeah. I'm almost like, you remember something? Yes.
We didn't know. Were you there?
Yeah. When you remember something from the same event that they participated in, right? But from a younger age, and you'll say what's the person who came to the barbecue, had the striped sweater on, who came with Aunt so and so,
right? And they're like, you didn't know.
They're like, who's that? Who's that? You know who that was? It kind of brings another whole thing into the conversation that they weren't thinking about. Yeah. And I think when I'm thinking about art and making art and using all of these different references and inspiration to create an object, I always think about entry points and the way that people can engage with the work on their own terms, not necessarily looking at the historical relationship that I may be thinking about as it relates to art history. Because of course, you can't unlearn those things if you learn them as an
Right,
artist.
right.
They're always embedded in your like subconscious when you're making things. It's always compared to something that has been made through, you know, a period of art before our time.
Right.
Usually, you know, a lot of times by a non-Black artist.
Right.
That we've embraced, we've learned to appreciate, we respect, you know, all the things we have to filter, but also making things that are really a watermark, I call them. Like, you know,
that's
image.
beautiful.
Yeah, think about like the, you know, the thing that you create. Of course, for people to understand it collectively, they have to understand it as it relates to like two different people. One, people have to look at it in the relationship to art history.
Yes.
Other people just have to like it.
Yeah.
And there's two different crowds of people that we deal with on a constant basis in these places like this, and just being more central. I enjoy the idea of acknowledging both things.
No, I agree with that. And I think, you know, New York is so expansive. The volume of the stories can go in millions of directions. But I think when you think about the Baltimores, the Chicagos, the Clevelands,
the Detroits,
the Little Rocks.
Yeah.
There's a way that the story is like so unique and colloquial, but also so universal. And so at any given point, we also know the kind of trigger to release the joy. So, you know, if you say Michael Jordan in Chicago, it's over.
Yeah.
Now, you can say it 10 ways, but that's an hour-long conversation. You know, is he the best?
Yeah.
Which shoe did you have?
Yeah.
Do you remember when?
Yeah.
You start any way you want, right? And so the more kind of unique you are, the more you can key in, but then you pull it all the way back.
Yeah.
You know, Black people invented time.
Yeah.
We can go from Michael Jordan to floating in the air.
Yeah,
you know, like,
exactly,
so there's always the
yeah.
way that you can kind of pull in and pull back out. And I think to your point, because we've existed in both environments, we're sort of naturally prepped to be the ones that can mesh them together and then translate it. I think that's the power of the work that we and our peers are doing right now.
Yes.
That we just do that seamlessly. It's not we don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a perfect way to, you know, to kind of understand the best way to honor these stories. This is all they would have. And isn't it so great that we understand the importance of that and can take it into the future?